Right. Today we're joined by Russell Brettholtz. He's a local creator here in the Albany area. I've talked to him before about his the product that we're going to be talking about today. His comic book Sidekick. He's running another Kickstarter, and I thought it'd be interesting to kind of bring him on again. We were supposed to meet at City Comic Con, and I think he had for some reason had to cancel. But since that point, we've talked a couple times. Did a paper review for the blog, and now we have him live in person. So let me just bring him in, and we'll hear about his next project. Hey, there you are. How's it going?
It's going well. Hello.
So, like I said, I think you were scheduled to be at the Electric City Comic Con, and for some reason couldn't make it. And then after that, we talked, and then so I think this is probably the first time I've talked to you in person.
Yeah, I think so.
So before we get into talking about the Kickstarter, I like to kind of see how people got into comic books. If you remember the first book that they read, and kind of how that influenced your wanting to create your own stuff.
Sure. So I think the first comics that I really read on any kind of regular basis were Archie comics, which my grandmother got me into when I was around 8 years old. Whenever I would go to visit her, she would always have some new Archies for me to read. And but then when I was 12, I discovered the X family of comic books, and it all started with Excalibur #2. One of my buddies came up to me and was like, "Russell, you need to be reading this book." And just everything about it was just spectacular. From the heroes that were made up of the former friends and family of the X-Men who were presumed dead at the time, the werewolves that were sent by Mojo to get Phoenix back. Like, just everything about that one book made me fall in love with everything that led me down the rabbit hole of the X-Men, which I then continued to collect for the next 30 years. So really, that was the one. The Archies kind of got me started, but then Excalibur #2 by Chris Claremont and Alan Davis just,
And what made you want to make your own universe heroes?
Well, I was always into creative writing. It was never anything that I considered, like doing as a part of my life. It was just either I did it for schoolwork or I did it for fun. Sometime around the mid '90s, when comic books kind of the quality I felt in the stories started going downhill a little bit. That's when I really sat down and said, I'm going to kill the X-Men and start from scratch with them. And that's what I did in high school and college. The X-Men are dead. Here are the few survivors, and here are the stories that I'm going to tell with them. And that was, I don't think the term existed yet, but it was fan fiction. And then finally, when the internet came around and I started posting them online, and I was getting, decent feedback from people who read it. And sometime in the early 2000s, I was on a website. It was a message board, and Gail Simone happened to be on that message board as well. And she posted an open letter to aspiring comic book creators. And it was like 12 points of things that you should be doing if you want to break into comic books as a writer. And one of the points was stop writing fan fiction. She said, it's one thing if you really just love it and want to do it. But if you're doing that because you think that's going to help you get into comics, just stop. Work on your own creator-owned stuff. And so I got out my notebook of ideas, and I said, okay, what in here would make for a good comic book? And the idea that jumped out at me that I thought I would have the best use out of was this story about superhero sidekicks who get sick and tired of being disrespected by the heroes that they work for, so they go on strike. And that idea ultimately became Sidekicked, which is the book I'm still working on. It's my only book so far. The Kickstarter is for the 6th issue. And I would love to have more books in production, but man, they're expensive. And that's literally the only thing that slows me down from working on more stuff, is just raising the money to pay my art team, because holy cow, do artists need to be paid. That is just so important to me, to one, have quality artists, and two, make sure they're getting paid, you know.
Now, kind of along that line, part of a group of local creators, you guys kind of joined together to form your own little studio. Is that right?
Yeah, so Catatomic Studios is kind of the umbrella studio for, there's about 10 of us now. We're all local creators, but we all have our own projects. But before the pandemic, we would get together every other week just to kind of work together and say, okay, you know, for the artists, you know, here's what we're drawing today. We're going to do some quick sketches of, you know, everybody do a Ninja Turtle, or, you know, everybody do your favorite Batman villain. And then for the writers, we were there just to kind of to help each other, say, oh, you know, man, I'm stuck on this one plot point. I don't know how to get from A to B. You know, hey, other writer, or, you know, the artists to, you know, what do you think? What do you think I can do? Just, you know, a good example, my buddy Ryan, who did one of the mini prints on the Kickstarter I did for Sidekick last year. I was telling him a story idea that I had about a cop who's hunting werewolves in Boston. And he's like, you know, you're really describing a noir story. And if you set it back in either the, you know, in the 50s, that might work a little better and you have a little nicer tone. And I was like, you know, that's a good idea. And it made me just kind of rethink the entire story in more of this noir feel. And he was absolutely right to do that. So that's the nice thing, is when we all get together, you know, even though we're all working on our own separate things, we're still helping each other, and everybody is being lifted up by just us being together like that.
Yeah, I went to one of the events that you guys put together. I think it was back in November. It was like a sipping sketch or something,
Sketch, yeah.
up in at one of the local bars.
Yeah, Peter Sefik is kind of the de facto leader. You know, he was the one who, whenever there was a local convention, he would be the one going around to the table saying, "Hey, are you local? Oh, well then, hey, you should come hang out with us." Yeah. You know, and so he's always looking for stuff like that to do. He's also the biggest cheerleader for everybody in that Art Jam crew, because he loves that atmosphere. And it's been really hard not having conventions this year, because we do a lot of conventions together, and just he's so much fun. We usually wind up having a table next to each other, and it's just so much fun to table near him, because he's such a bright personality. And to not have that this year, it's like, oh, I'm really, really missing that. And then, you know, to not have the.
I also.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, to not have our jams. You know, it's like, oh, I'm really missing these guys, you know, so it's not the same to, you know, collaborate online as it is to sit around a table working together.
Well, I know at that event, I was able to grab one of Jeff Bonesteel's Inktober sketches, and he's always a guy to talk to. Since we go to the same local, you know, conventions. Well, back when they had conventions.
Yeah, no, Jeff Bonesteel is fantastic.
But,
he's my concept artist. He does all of the designs whenever I have a new character. He's always the guy I go to, and I say, yeah, it's got to be, you know, someone who she can turn invisible, and you know, her costume is black and red and go nuts. And then he designs it from that. You know, I gave him the vaguest descriptions of what a character should look like, and then he pounds it out. And for the first time this year, actually for the Kickstarter, he's allowing me to put some of the original concept art that he did for this book. He's letting me use it for the Kickstarter. So that was really great. Just as an example, I've actually got a piece of one of Jeff's. Like this is his original hand drawn of one of the bad guys in the book. It's kind of a hybrid between a Komodo dragon and a wolf, and it's wearing armor, and it's just awesome. And he was like, because I asked him, I was like, hey, do you have anything that we can use for the Kickstarter? And he's like, hey, why don't you take the originals? And I said, really? You willing to give those up? He's like, yeah, no problem. Coolest guy. And I love it.
Yeah. So that's a great segue. Tell us a little bit about Sidekick and the history of the book and what influenced it.
Sure. So I was working as an assistant to a financial planner. It was a clerical job, mostly administrative stuff, a lot of file work. And probably the biggest part of my job, though, was correcting the mistakes of the financial planner that I worked for. And that's important because when you're in finance, you need everything to be right or you can get into a lot of trouble. And my job was to make sure that this guy didn't get into a lot of trouble. And finally, I was like, I don't want to be an assistant for the rest of my life. I'd like to, be a financial planner myself. I was like, so can you help me out with, getting put on that track? And I was promptly fired. And I don't know if there was more to it than just, and he didn't like the way I was asking, but it occurred to me that there really is an arrogance of power. And I wanted to tell a story about the arrogance of power. There's a great story about a guy who had one of those, I forget the name of it. It's like how there's like a basket of bagels or muffins or something, and you put the money in and you take the bagel or the muffin, but there's no way to know if anybody's really doing it. There's a name for that. I forget the name. And
honor system.
The honor system. Yeah. And the guy who owned like the basket of food noticed that the higher up he went in an office building, the less likely he was to get the full amount of the food that was being taken. And the people who are working higher up in the building are the higher ups, they're the executives. And that stuck with me. I was like, wow, these are the people making 6 figures or more a year, and they can't be bothered to put $1 for the bagel that they took. That level of arrogance. And so, getting fired from my job made me realize there is a story here. And there are probably lots of people who can relate to the idea of, being dedicated and being dependable at a job and still being disrespected by the boss, doing the work and getting none of the credit. And being a comic book fan being a comic book fan and particularly superheroes, I said the superhero sidekick relationship is the perfect way to tell that story. And that's how originally Sidekicked became born. And so I immediately sat down to start writing the script, and the first issue just poured out of me. And I was like, I have a first issue. I'm good to go. And then I didn't do anything with it because I didn't have an artist. I didn't know what else I needed to do. I was just happy to have a script. But then years later, when Kickstarter magically appeared on the internet, I realized, I could actually do this. I can find myself an artist. I can raise the money to do this. And I was on comicbookresources.com. They have a forum there for artists to share their work. And there was one guy who shared some superhero stuff. It was all original work. It wasn't, it wasn't like the DC or the Marvel stuff. But just looking at it, I immediately knew this is the guy that I need to talk to him. And I sent him an email out of the blue. His name is Miguel Mendoza. And I said, hey, I've got an idea here. Can I send you the script? And he was like, yeah, no problem, sure. So I sent him the script and said, you know what? Yeah, let's work something out. And so we worked out, a page rate for him to do the book. And I went to my local comic shop and I sold a stack of my Silver Age X-Men so that I could pay him for it, just to get the ball rolling. Because I knew I needed those 4 pages and a cover to use for the Kickstarter. Because I knew that book was going to cost between $3,000 and $4,000 just for the artwork. And I don't know about you, but I don't have that, in my couch cushions. But then, once that first book got rolling, because that Kickstarter did very, very well, we wound up raising $7,500, I think, from 350 backers. So that's when it kind of clicked. Okay, there's really something here. This is going to resonate with people. Unfortunately, Miguel had to leave the book after the first issue because he wound up getting a lot of work at DC. He was drawing Wonder Woman, the Teen Titans, Green Lantern. He drew the New 52 Nightwing, Justice League Dark. He's drawing Aquaman right now. So I couldn't be more happy.
A couple of their minor characters.
Yeah, exactly. Just the little ones. It would have been nice if he could have stuck around long enough to finish the book, but I only wish him the best because at the end of the day, I had him before DC, so I clearly was doing something right. And Bong Dezo finished the book for me for pencils, and that was 4 issues that told the entire story of the Sidekick strike. I very much wanted it to be a self-contained story. I didn't want people to get to the end and go, well, where's the rest of the story? Where's the ending? So, I treated it, I don't want to say I treated it like a movie, but I treated it like a miniseries. I said, if this last issue is the last issue ever produced of this book, I want to make sure that the audience is satisfied with it. And there is actually a little bit of a cliffhanger at the end of that 4th issue. And that was, but it doesn't really affect the story. It's the villain, the sidekicks of the villains coming together and kind of, having their strike moment and, oh, it's our turn now. And, it's a nice little tease for something that could come in the future, but I don't think anybody was saying, no, how dare you not tell us what happens to these characters at the end? But so that's actually, that was all collected in the trade paperback, which is published by Darby Pop Publishing, who I'm very, very happy with. Yep, there's Miguel's cover. He did all of the covers for the first 4 issues. And I think just that one with the cape hitting the sidekick in the face. And I didn't tell him to do that. That was all him. I originally asked for just a team shot. Give me the 5 main sidekicks in a hero pose. And he came back and said, I'm not doing that. This is what I've got for you. And I thought, wow, way to capture the theme of the book in one picture, Miguel. Thank you. But yeah, so those first 4 issues were collected by Darby Pop Publishing. That came out in October of 2015. We sold through that first print run in about 2 years, and then they reprinted it in a deluxe edition. So this new one actually has some extra material in it. There's a bonus. There's 22 pages of bonus stuff in there, which tell there are 2 11-page stories that tell the first outing between one of the sidekicks and one of the heroes, and then another pairing, just to kind of show right, here's what happened in the past a little bit, to give just a little more flavor. And then we sold through that print run last year. So we're now on, the 3rd print of the book, and we're about halfway sold through of that. And again, we not having conventions, makes it so difficult because that's where the majority of my revenue for the comic comes in is at the conventions. But I could not be happier with how that first book is selling. And that's one of the reasons why I did the sequel, is because, I really didn't think about it. It didn't occur to me. I didn't try to plant seeds really for a sequel in the original 4 issues. It was just, let me tell this story and be happy. but people would come to me at conventions and say, hey, I bought your book last year. When do you have a new issue coming out? And I'd have to say, oh, I don't have any new issues coming out, but let me think. And enough people asked me about it, and I said, okay, this is ridiculous. Let me put aside what I'm currently working on, and do this, because I knew it would sell. You know, I knew I had a story that people were interested in. I knew there was a fan base that was waiting for it. So I said, all right, let me come up with a new story. So the only problem was I had resolved the strike, which is kind of that's the central problem in the first book, is the sidekicks are on strike. And I resolved that by the end. So I needed to come up with something new. Say, okay, what will maintain that theme of dedicated, dependable, yet disrespected, even though that's no longer the world that the sidekicks are living in. So I thought, okay, then it needs to be a villain, and it needs to be a villain that is so massive that the new sidekicks, they cannot handle it on their own, and help is going to have to be called in. And that's where, that's where these guys came into play. They're aliens, and they take over genetics laboratory, and they don't speak English, so nobody knows what their goal is, and they're too powerful for this new group of sidekicks to stop on their own. And so that's where the 5th issue picks up with that. That was what we kickstarted last year. That's this book here, Sidekicks, the chapter 5. Oh, cover art by Dustin Collins, I should say, recreating that photograph of men atop a skyscraper from, I think it's a 1932 photograph, which I just happen to love.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, Dustin, I liked the way he did it. And so we pick up shortly after the strike in that issue, and everything's going well. It's, hey, things are good now. Some of the heroes are working with the former sidekicks. They have Chicago's first super team, and the media is happy with them. The people are happy with them. Everybody's getting along, and then the aliens take over this genetics laboratory. And kind of the cliffhanger, not to spoil too much, but the cliffhanger at the end of that issue of chapter 5 is that they only think there are 2 aliens, and therefore they can handle it no problem. What they don't realize is 8 more have just arrived in the basement of the place. And so in chapter 6, which is what I am kickstarting right now, we pick up with, all right, we're going to go save the day and rescue those hostages that are in there. And oh no, we are not, because we are way outgunned. And that's the story, where it picks up. And ultimately, this is going to be 5. There's going to be 5 issues, and so this is the 2nd issue of that new arc. That cover is by Nicole Jellinek, another local creator. She's part of our jam crew at Catatomic Studios. Oh, and I just absolutely loved it. I told her, give me action. One of the aliens, attacking Phantasm, in the lab, and that was what she gave me. I thought, oh, just fantastic. I could not be happier with it. And for fans of that cover, Nicole was really kind, and she said that I could put the original up as a reward. I don't know.
Hold on, let me get a good shot of that. There we go.
Yeah, so there's the original.
Oh, that's awesome.
That is Nicole's original pencils that she did, and she's allowing me to sell it as part of the Kickstarter. So 1, thank you, Nicole, for letting me do that, and 2, just such a great piece. So if anybody really likes that art, it is available on the Kickstarter page. And that's where the story's going. I don't want to spoil too much into the future, but.
Well, tell us a little bit about the sidekick characters. Sure.
So I like the number 5. It's an easier number to work with when you're trying to have a group dynamic. 3 is kind of slim, 7 can get unwieldy. So 5 seemed like a good place to be. A lot of my favorite X-Men stories, there were 5 main members of the team at the time. So in the first book, we're really telling Richard's story, and Richard is Phantasm. He's on the cover there in the yellow. And we open with him contemplating suicide. Literally the gun is in his mouth is the very first image of the book. And it's one of the first things I thought of when I sat down to write it. His fiance has left him just 2 weeks before the wedding because it's finally occurred to her that he is only going to be a sidekick for the rest of his life. And she thought she was marrying a superhero. That was inspired by the Adam Sandler movie, The Wedding Singer, when his fiance stands him up because he's only a wedding singer. I thought, I love that. Just that feeling of you're only a something. It's like, no, love me for what I am, not what you want me to be. And so, so that story, we're really following Richard's story from contemplating suicide to being mistreated by Mr. Marvelous, who is the hero that he works with, and finally being talked into this strike by his friends, and really having to reconcile not helping, because that's really what it boils down to, is the villains realize, hey, the heroes don't have their help anymore. We can probably take them if we think about this. And the sidekicks, when seeing, Chicago just really starting to fall to hell, they have to say, no, well, we need this to happen. We need this to play out. And just watching kind of Richard go through that from, no, we're supposed to be heroes, to, okay, I guess we can allow some of this to happen. And then finally to, the let's save the day moment. And the part of the reason why that happens is because Mr. Marvelous does eventually get beaten down by the villains, specifically Crimson. In the first book, the villains are called the Board of Directors. So if you're feeling a labor story being told here, that's not an accident. I liked the idea of the villains, although not being a team, still coordinating with each other and getting together, for meetings every once in a while to say, okay, how can we make life a little easier for all of us so we're not tripping over each other while we're committing these villainous acts. So the board of directors comes up with a plan to take out the main heroes of the city, and Mr. Marvelous is the last one to fall. And it's with his fall that Richard finally gets the respect that he's been waiting for. And then Mustang, Dan, is kind of the de facto leader of this group of sidekicks, because they're not a team. They all work with other heroes, but they're also all friends. And he's the one who ultimately says, okay, guys, we're going on strike, because we've had enough of this. And it's because he actually became too popular for his hero. He was actually more popular than the hero that he was working for. And that's why he winds up getting fired from being a sidekick. And that's like the final straw for Dan. And he said, so he rallies the troops, says, okay, guys, we're going on strike. And it comes down to Dan to be the one at the end to say, okay, things are bad enough. Now it's time to save the day. Then there's Frostbite, who's Walter. He's my Clark Kent. He works at the newspaper. He's the assistant editor. And I really liked writing for Walter, particularly at the paper, because it gave me a chance to say, the importance of media in the world, particularly on how media shapes views. And the editor at the paper is this, J. Jonah Jameson type, who's always yelling at people, but he wants to be fair. It's like, all right, I'm not going to smear anybody, but let's be honest about what's going on. And so between Kincaid, who's the editor-in-chief at the paper, and Walter, Frostbite, who's the assistant editor, I really liked having them talk and talking about what's going on in the world, because it's important to see just how much influence media can have on perception of what's happening. And then there's Atlas, who is George, and he is kind of the heart and soul of the group. You know, he's a devout Catholic. In a lot of shots, I wanted to make sure we could see his cross around his neck. And he is always the one who's questioning what they are doing and why they are doing it, and if it's having the effect that they want. You know, he's the first one to say, guys, things are getting really bad in the city, and I think we need to reconsider our strike. So, you know, he's really the conscience of the team. And in the new series, starting with chapter 5, he is now kind of the leader of this new team, because he's got the combat training. Atlas is super strong. In his backstory, which is in the trade paperback, we do a little bio section at the end for all of the sidekicks. You know, we read that George was a wrestler in high school. He was recruited into the Marines. You know, he is skilled in combat. So it made a lot of sense for him to kind of take over the leadership role now that things have calmed down and everybody's working together, because he's the one who's going to train everybody and make sure that they're working as a team, which was the theme that I was shooting for this new arc, is that teamwork is really important. You know, we really don't see a lot of teamwork going on in the first 4 issues, because there are no super teams. And that was deliberate on my part, and that stemmed from there's a great scene at the end of Batman Begins, the Christopher Nolan film, where Gordon is talking to Batman and says, "Aren't you worried about escalation? You know, like, here you are, you're not a cop, you're not a person, you're a guy dressed as a bat doing all of this amazing stuff. Aren't you concerned that the bad guys in the city are going to raise their abilities as well to keep up with what you're doing?" And that's ultimately what happens in the second movie. So I really like that idea of the heroes kind of being aware of this. You know, the superpowered people of this world are aware that escalation is a thing. And I allude to an incident in New York I think it's in chapter 4, in the 4th issue of the book, and I don't explain it. I just say, you know, I think it's Atlas who asks, you know, aren't we concerned about, you know, forming this group? You know, didn't we learn our lesson after New York? And I never really explained that, but the story really there is New York had a super team, and New York was demolished, and just that kind of made everybody realize, okay, we can't do this anymore. You know, teams are just a bad idea. It encourages bad things to happen. And then rounding out the group is Jolt, is Al, and he was a lot of fun to write because he is my Robin. He is the sidekick to the Batman character, the Flying Fox, and the Flying Fox is rich, and he is arrogant. And when Al's car breaks down, he asks for a loan from the guy to say, "Hey, you know, can you help me out? I just need to get a new car." And then he says no. You know, the hero that he's been working with for 5 years, who's a millionaire and who has a garage full of cars, tells him, "You're never going to learn personal responsibility if I just give you this money." And so Al's probably the angriest of the group. And I really enjoyed playing with, you know, he really is my Dick Grayson if Batman was a dick, you know, like
hold on.
What would happen? It was, and so that's, you know, so playing with Al was a lot of fun for me, and keeping him angry, because he winds up having to get a job at a Burger World flipping burgers and pushing fries on people. And it's like, how low can you get? When you're a superhero and you save the city countless times, and now you're asking people if they want fries with that. So Al was a lot of fun to write. And so those were the original main sidekicks. And in the new issue, they get joined by Mr. Marvelous and Captain Celerity, who were Phantasm and Mustang's heroes, respectively. And Mr. Marvelous is he's my Superman archetype. He's super strong. He's invulnerable. He can fly. But he was also really arrogant, unwilling to give the respect, to his sidekick that was deserved. But after his beatdown, he's learned his lesson. He accepts that sometimes, you got to ask for help from people. And so he's willing to work with the new team, who I'm calling the Cooperative, just as my kind of foil to the board of directors in the last series. So now there's the good guys known as the Cooperative. And Captain Celerity, who is just super fast. And he's come to realize, maybe I should worry more about the people that I'm out saving than my image, because he was the one who fired Mustang for being too popular. So just bringing everybody down a few steps. It's like the heroes are here, so let's bring them down a little bit. We'll put them on the same playing field as the former sidekicks. Have them be a team working together, because I didn't set out to tell a dark superhero story, despite the fact that the first issue, the first page is Richard with the gun in his mouth. But I didn't want it to be like a farce either. I wanted to take it seriously. But I did want to lighten the mood just a little bit from where we were in the first 4 issues. Like, okay, we handled the darkness. So now let's lighten it up a little bit, but still try to tell a good story.
So, what have you learned as a writer from from the first issue to the current issue?
Let's see. I think it's funny because I'm going to give you a structural, technical answer. But I learned to ask my artist what kind of detail they need from me, because I find that I can either be overly vague or overly detailed from panel to panel, and you really need to be able to match your artist's style. You really need to know what your artist wants from you. And I think part of that is, like with Miguel, I can be very, very vague on that first issue because I didn't know what I was doing. So like a panel description would be, Mustang and Phantasm are walking down the street. And that was it. There's no more description than that. But I've since learned, like, okay, yeah. So now my penciler on the new book, who did chapter 5, who's doing chapter 6, he's halfway through chapter 7, is Andre Portilla, who is he is doing a fantastic job. I absolutely see him one day at DC or Marvel. Hopefully not before he finishes my book. But with Andre, I knew to ask him. I was like, what level of detail are you looking for? And he told me, he was very clear. He was like, be as detailed as you can be, because that way I'll know I'm giving you what you're looking for. Because he had worked with some people in the past who, they didn't ask him that question, and they'd give him a vague panel description, which he would draw. And then he would get no, that's not what I was looking for. I'm looking for this. And then he would get the detail and said, well, why didn't you give me those details before I drew? Mm-hmm. So probably the biggest thing I've learned as a writer is to ask my artists what they're looking for. But in terms, I'm trying to think if I've really changed the way I write, like in terms of story, like how I approach a story. And I honestly, I don't think I do, because I've been writing for so long. You know, I started, you know, even just my creative writing back in school. You know, I'm 43 years old. I've been doing this for 30 years now. So I really don't think I approach the story any differently, except for I'm more willing to accept sitting on something. You know, I'm a very slow writer. You know, my friend, the Art Jam crew, all make fun of me because they're like, "Hey, Russell, what did you write today? You know, a word." And I'm like, because they know how slow I am. But part of the reason for that is I like to sit on something because I'll eventually just realize, oh, wait a second. If I do something this way, it's going to make it better. You know, just as an example, in the first 4 issues of the book, one, it was originally supposed to be 3 issues. And when I started plotting it out, I had written the entire second script for that issue, only to realize that the sidekicks only appeared in 7 pages. And I was like, oh man, I can't call a book Sidekicks about sidekicks and then have them not be in the entire second issue of a 3-issue miniseries. So I wound up having to scrap the entire script for that and go back to the drawing board. And part of that was saying, okay, I can't do this in 3. It has to be 4 issues. But then because of that, because of the delay in having to rewrite the second issue, one of my buddies said to me, he goes, you know, and this is again, you know, things that can come out of, you know, just being together with people in a crew. One of my friends said to me, oh yeah, and then the villain sidekicks can do this. I didn't have villain sidekicks at all in the original concept for the book. You know, the sidekicks are a superhero thing. You know, villains have henchmen. They don't have sidekicks, and those are 2 very different things.
Yeah.
But him saying that made me realize, but what if the villains had sidekicks? What can I do with that? And so being slow was actually really good for me in that moment, because the villains, or specifically the sidekick villains in the first 4 issues, were probably my favorite parts to write, because they didn't have to be good, you know, like morally good, not, you know, good. And there's something just a lot of fun dealing with immoral characters who approach their superheroics very differently. You know, this isn't, you know, the Joker creating chaos because that's what he enjoys doing. This isn't somebody who is just trying to gain power and influence. You know, it's what are the motivations really behind these characters, you know, that makes you to have these superpowers but still want to work with the villains. And so they became just so much fun to write. And that never would have happened if I was a fast writer. If I was fast and efficient, I would have blown through, you know, my 3 issues, and those characters wouldn't exist. And now, you know, when they show up in the new series, you know, they wouldn't be there. So it worked out to my advantage. So now I'm much more accepting of, you know what, just, you're a slow writer, go ahead and be slow. And I think George R. R. Martin actually makes this a lot easier for me, because at least it doesn't take me 11 years to put out an issue. So I've got that going for me.
So this isn't your first Kickstarter, but, you know, current events are kind of a little, probably, you know, a little different than they, you know, have been. Have you, you know, are there any challenges or, you know, anything like that you had to take into account when, you know, deciding whether or not to launch the Kickstarter?
Yeah, launching the Kickstarter, no. Like, that wasn't, you know, a pandemic is probably a great time to do a Kickstarter because people have more money because they didn't go to the conventions. But that's assuming there's overlap between the convention crowd and the Kickstarter crowd, which I mean, I'm sure there's some. It's a little, it's harder to get the book in front of people online through Kickstarter than it is at a convention. But the fact that there's a pandemic, I think the biggest concern for me launching the Kickstarter was there are certain countries that the United States Postal Service will not ship to right now. Just as an example, my artist, Andre, is in Colombia, and I cannot physically send him things, and he can't physically send me things. So if there are backers who wanted to get physical copies of the book who live in one of these countries, they can't get it. So that is unfortunate, but you can get digital copies of the book, so that's not, that wasn't a deal breaker for me, but it's just one of those things like, oh, well, it's a real shame that the plague is stopping me from shipping a book to someplace. But other than that, the one really great thing about this Kickstarter that I never had before is the series. The issue is done. All of the artwork is finished. Andre finished all of the pencils. Quepler Perchner is my inker, and he finished all of the inks. Colin Patrick Moore is my colorist, and he finished all of that. HD is my letterer, and it is 100% done. And none of my books have ever been 100% done going into a Kickstarter before, because I usually need the Kickstarter to pay my artists. But finally, because the book had been selling so well at conventions, I was able to build up a war chest, and I was able to dive into the war chest a little bit to finish, all of the artwork for the issue. Now, unfortunately, that tapped me out, and Andre is already working on the chapter 7. And I did have to go into my personal comic book collection again. I haven't had to do that in a while because between the Kickstarters and the conventions, I've had enough money to pay the artists. But I want to keep the ball rolling. I don't want there to be a pause in Andre working on the book, because that's usually when bad things happen, is when the art team goes, oh, I guess we're done for a little while. Let me find other things to do. And then, oh yeah, I'm sorry, I'd love to work on your book, but I'm now busy with this stuff. So I want to make sure that I keep, particularly Andre, penciling the series, as continuously as we can. So I wound up selling. I had a copy of Amazing Spider-Man number 50, which is the first appearance of the Kingpin in comic books. And 10 years ago, I was at a convention where I had Stan Lee sign 3 of my books, and that was one of the books that I had Stan sign. And that was the one that I said, you know what, this is going to give me enough money to get Andre through this next issue. So I wound up selling that on eBay, which was hard. I'll tell you, that was really hard to sell, but it was worth it at the end of the day. I love the fact that I can make my own comic books, and if the price of that is a piece from my collection, you know what? I got to meet Stan. I got to have that interaction with him. I still have 2 more books that he signed. So, giving that one up, it was hard, but it's worth it for the dream of my own book.
Totally. So, anything else? I mean, where can people, find your stuff besides the Kickstarter? And I'll definitely include the link in the, notes to the video. But where else can they, find anything, your stuff, or the, your group of creators?
Sure.
Where can you find their stuff?
So if you go to catatomicstudios.com, that's CAT atomicstudios.com. That's our umbrella site where we're all at. And there's, I'm pretty sure like all of our main projects are on there. We may not update it as often as we should, but again, it's because we're not getting together, and when we don't get together, we're not producing new content. And if we're not producing new content, then the site's not getting updated. But that's a good place to start, is the catatomicstudios.com page. If you're looking for more Sidekicked, you can head over to Facebook and just put in Sidekicked Comics in the search, and that should get you over to the Sidekicked page. If you're on Twitter, I am at Sidekicked Comics, but instead of a CS at the end, it's an X. And my name will come up, Russell Brettholtz, on that too. It's funny, I was Sidekicked Comics for the longest time, until some of my friends who were on Twitter, they were like, you should probably put your name so people start to associate you as a writer and not just the book. And I was like, oh yeah, that's good. I'm terrible at branding. And if you want to email me,
hey, same here.
If you would like to email me directly, it's Sidekicks, not Sidekicked, sidekickscomics@gmail.com. And I just want to show off just two more things. So we were talking about Jeff Bonesteel. One of the things that he's doing for the Kickstarter campaign is sketch covers. So I'm just gonna try to. So we've got a blank sketch cover for this is the chapter 5, and he'll do a head sketch. He'll do a half body. That's some of the two of the rewards. He also will do just an 11x17 commission. So Jeff's work really is fantastic, and it's totally worth it. And since you can't get out to a convention this year to see him, I highly recommend doing that. And one of the other things we're going to show is we did a limited to 100 variant cover. This was drawn by Nicole Jellinek, who did the cover for the newest issue, and we only printed 100 of those. And that's an add-on for the book, because it's the chapter 5 issue. I was thinking about doing more variants for the new issue, but I thought, you know what, let's keep it a little simple. But that's still available. I love that cover. That's her riff on the cooperative with all of the characters on there. So I did want to highlight those two things, because again, the nice thing about having, Catatomic Studios and the Art Jam crew is that we do all work together. And when one person is doing something and they need something, it's like, oh yeah, let me do it. So Jeff Bonesteel is part of that group, and I use him for my concept art. Nicole Jellinek is part of that group, so she's done a couple of covers for me. And so it's really nice to have all of that when it comes together like that.
Well, I can speak to, like I mentioned before, I can speak to art, because the piece I got from him from his Inktober was the Bartman Who Laughs. It was a cross between Simpson, because my big sketch thing is Simpsons and DC characters, so that was like right in my wheelhouse.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I love, and then that's something I got to tell you that we'll spitball while we're around the table is, okay, give me two things that don't relate, and then bam, we're going to do it together. So Jeff has that. Dustin, who did the main cover for the last issue, has a Walking Seeks, which is a Rick and Morty dressed up as Rick and Carl from The Walking Dead, and then the Mr. Meeseeks are the zombies, and there's a bunch of Mr. Meeseeks, and he did a print of that, which looked fantastic. Peter Sefik has a print that is Bert and Ernie as Cable and Deadpool, and it's just hysterical. You see it, and it's just people immediately get it. And again, like I will table next to him at a show, and that's the one that people stop and they point at and they start laughing, and then they're at his table looking at what else he has. And those are just those are the great things sometimes that come out of just being in a table with a bunch of artists, that kind of stuff.
Well, is there anything else? I mean, I think we pretty much we covered a lot. Thank you for taking the time to talk, and good luck with the Kickstarter. You're what, halfway there?
Yeah, we hit the 50% mark today, so I'm feeling really, really great. And thank you so much for having me on. I love chatting.
Well, this will definitely be up, hopefully within the next day or so, and can chat the my stuff at on Twitter. I'm at TU Comics Blog. Sometimes I post stuff on my Instagram. I also write for comic book resources. I write lists, so sometimes I'll post stuff up there. You can check the blog out at union.com/comic-books, and subscribe to the channel. There should be there'll probably be something here or there when I put it in. But again, thanks for taking the time to talk to us, and you're welcome back anytime.
Sure, thank you.
So yeah, I'll talk to you later.
Okay, thanks a lot, Chad. I appreciate it.
All right, thanks again.
All right.